Welcome, fellas. So, I think there is no need to introduce today's review. It's on the cult classic anime, Guyver. This series had a 1989 OVA series, along with a reboot in 2005, which told more of the story from the manga, as well as two live-action movie adaptations. The setup is fairly straightforward. A mysterious device of alien origin called the Guyver Unit, a massive organization that controls the world from the shadows. The use of biologically enhanced super soldiers called zoonoids that are employed by the secret organization, Kronos. An unassuming student chances upon the unknown device while goofing off with his friend. Curiosity gets the better of them and moves closer, only to have the Guyver unit activate and install itself onto him, turning him into a bioweapon that far surpasses the ones fielded by Kronos. And now an underground war unfolds between the youth trying to protect himself and his loved ones from the nefarious plans of Kronos, shattering his everyday life he took for granted and forcing him to make hard choices. The concepts and story elements are nothing new, even for back then when the manga series was published. But that's where the skill in the author's storytelling takes place. This is a well-structured, well-paced story that the viewer could enjoy without getting lost. This is far different from modern anime series that either throw too many concepts at you all at once, or suffer from introducing or explaining key concepts and plot points of the series too late into the story for it to make any sense, much to the frustration of the audience and possibly causing them to lose interest in the rest of the story. In the second case, it just looks like the author expects the audience to know about these concepts beforehand without any sort of hint or foreshadowing, and to just go along with it until the author decides to introduce those story elements, instead of when the story flow required those points to be explained, for the maximum impact and interest to the audience. One of the main factors that governs the effectiveness of a story is when the key elements of the plot are logically established at relevant points in the story. And it's the author's job to recognize those points and implement those elements. It's not because the author is writing the story that they could choose when to introduce those elements. That is an absolute fallacy in modern story writing that is not only blatant in Western works, but also in a lot of recent manga series. Fortunately, Guyver does not suffer from this. While it's clear it draws inspiration from older series like Kamen Rider, it established its own identity with its own following, even bringing people to check out the Kamen Rider series, even if just out of curiosity. You start with the Guyver unit itself, merging with Sho and demonstrating its raw strength against one of the physically stronger zoonoids. Then, as more episodes go by, more of the Guyver's abilities are introduced, showcasing why Kronos would want it so badly. But it's not about its sheer power. It's the mystery around the Guyver unit itself and its origins. The story also explains to you that the plot device called the Guyver has its limitations and weaknesses as well. And I mean real weaknesses, not minor vulnerabilities that the author chose to exaggerate to fabricate some form of Achilles' heel. This form of fake vulnerability is seen in a lot of recent anime where, when that same weak point is exploited at a later point in the story, it was just something minor. This is an author's feeble attempt at trying to give his overpowered protagonist some kind of veil showing that he isn't going to one-shot the enemy. But he does anyway. It's like walking with an egg on a spoon and doing a bunch of shenanigans that would surely cause the egg to fall. But the egg doesn't fall because the egg is super glued to the spoon. There's too many to pick from. But why don't you guys put in the comments a series you saw where this sort of fake vulnerability is used in the protagonist? But luckily, Guyver doesn't have this lame kind of story development. The Guyver has true fatal weaknesses. This is shown in the fight with a rival unit holder called Lisker, designated as Guyver 2, who while was a temporary first hurdle for show. was still crucial to the story. By demonstrating the strength of the Guyver unit when equipped to a trained individual when compared to Sho, who was just a schoolboy and a novice in fighting. But also, one of its biggest flaws being its control metal, and what happens when that flaw is exploited. Then there's the third unit holder called Guyver 3, who orchestrated the events that led to Sho becoming Guyver 1. At first, he acts like everything was in the palm of his hand, but the fact is that he underestimated Kronos' leadership, leading to him to reluctantly ally with Sho, instead of letting Sho take the brunt of Kronos' attention while he moved in the shadows. To be honest, he was a bit of a poser, but he still had some understandable motivations for his actions. Sho just ended up being caught in the middle. However, even with a Guyver being a match for another Guyver, Kronos had some interesting countermeasures for defeating the Guyver, exposing the Guyver's limitations. This included advanced zoonoids called hyperzoonoids, which were developed from data acquired from Guyver 2, in combination with the genius of one of the Zoolords called Balkus. One of the most challenging adversaries would be the Hyperzoonoid Team 5, which hilariously sounds like the name of a Sentai team. Even the development of a special type of zoonoid called Enzyme, which was designed to dissolve the bio booster armor, with a cruel twist that Sho's captured father would be the one processed into the special zoonoid, and brainwashed to fight his son, which ends up with an unexpected and tragic result. And, of course, the Guyver cannot go head-to-head with a Zoolord, at least in its base configuration anyway. The title does not shy away from gore and violent situations. You get a good sense of relatability to Sho as a protagonist, being an average guy that was thrown into a hostile environment. Nothing particularly exceptional about him, possessing insecurities and being indecisive at times. But like almost all protagonists in stories from that era, he rises to the occasion, the hero's journey. Originally starting off as meek and a bit helpless without his support, he starts to grow and be decisive in his actions while still valuing his friends and allies. It's not just Sho either. You get a good perspective of his allies. Some were mysterious, like Mikami, and some were enemies at first, like Aptum. Some just saw him as a pawn in their plans, like Guyver 3, but then came to respect him. You also get a good perspective about Kronos, who first starts off with a viewpoint as a plain evil organization. But just like Shrek, there are layers to it. There are different factions amongst the executive Zoolords, and even rogue Zoolords who try to usurp power for themselves. There is also a sense of kinship amongst some of the Zoolords, humanizing them slightly to the viewers. Instead of the bland, just evil for their own gain mold, like what a majority of antagonists in modern entertainment seem to use. The story does all of this while not losing the audience to convoluted plots, and giving a good helping of action and violence. But to add to my previous statement of the bland evil for their own gain character trope, the pathetic attempt to justify it by claiming to be a victim of society is just smooth-brained writing. Respond in the comments if you're also tired of modern writers' storytelling, and in a similar sense as my previous entry, Tekamon Blade. It balances the blows dealt to each side and how they respond, giving the reader a superb overall view of the story as a whole. Another cool thing about the series was the variety to the zoonoids that showed up to Battle Show. It's fun how imaginative the designs and abilities of the zoonoids are, and how they are used to counter the Guyver. It gives a good idea of the author's imagination. But one of the main twists in the story that makes Guyver unique is that, at a point in the story, Kronos succeeds in its goal of world domination, forcing both Sho and Guyver 3 to begin combating Kronos while seen as world enemies. It's also interesting how both Guyvers went about their retaliation against Kronos. Sho forms a small resistance with just his friends and closest allies, while Guyver 3 went and made a counter-organization to Kronos and took more noticeable actions. It's very rare for a series to have the antagonists succeed at that level of their plans. But at the end of the day, Kronos' ploy for world domination was just a phase for another goal in the story. This is different from a lot of series where world domination is the end goal. Guyver gives a description that nothing changed once Kronos took control of the world. As a matter of fact, some things got better since technically the world was unified. There were some nefarious intentions in some of their policies, like giving preferential treatment to civilians who volunteer for the zoonoid conversion process, omitting the fact that all zoonoids would be under the full control of the zoolords regardless of their will. But for the most part, the rule under the zoolords was benign. But in the manga, it's reaching a point where there is going to be a confrontation with perhaps the most anticipated enemy in the series, the Uranus, with them sending an advanced agent, Apollyon, to start shaking things up. I'm hoping for the series to have a satisfying conclusion. But I digress. The point I want to make is that if you want a good, entertaining science fiction anime, which is rare nowadays with the just nauseating amount of isekai anime with overpowered protagonists coming out every season, I can't recommend Guyver enough, but unfortunately, just like Tekkaman Blade, the animation has become outdated, even when taking into account the 2005 remake. This classic could benefit from a bit of a facelift with respect to its animation. I see that a few older series are getting some updates to their animation, like One Piece and Samurai X, for example. Maybe a studio may decide to do the same for this gem of a series, especially considering that the manga has more releases from when the remake stopped. I'll end the video here. If you like my videos, please share, like, and subscribe. Till next time, bye.